Circles. How to find the area of a sector in a circle using degrees. What are they? 2D objects where each point is the same distance from the center. Why the radius of a circle can be used to determine the size of a room. Interesting fact. A common urban legend is that a duck's quack does not echo. This has, however, been proven to be false. Now, here are the examples we're going to be discussing in today's video. Let's take a closer look at example 1. Now let's read the steps. Step 1, substitute the radius and the angle. And step 2, follow order of operations. Now let's read the question. Find the area of the shaded sector. Before we begin with that, our first step is to write down the formula of an area of a sector in circles. And that formula is pi times radius squared times theta over 360 degrees. This looks very similar to the area formula of a circle, and that's because it is. The portion that we added, theta over 360 degrees, will tell us the area of the circle that we want. Now let's take a look at the circle. They gave us two measurements, 60 degrees and 4 centimeters. That 60 degrees is the central angle, and that 4 centimeters is the radius because the line above it starts from the center and goes to the edge. Now we can go ahead and substitute those two numbers into the formula, and now we have sector AB is equal to pi times 4 squared times 60 degrees divided by 360 degrees. Now let's go ahead and follow the order of operations, and 4 squared is 16 because 4 times 4 is 16. And now we have sector AB is equal to pi times 16 times 60 degrees divided by 360 degrees. Now we're going to go ahead and simplify the 60 degrees and 360 degrees by dividing each number by 60 degrees, and 60 degrees divided by 60 degrees is 1, and 360 degrees divided by 60 degrees is 6. And now let's write down what we have so far. So we have sector AB is equal to pi times 16 times 1 over 6. Now, we can multiply the 16 times the 1, 6, or we can go ahead and continue to simplify, and we can divide each number by 2, and 16 divided by 2 is 8, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So let's write down what we have so far. So we have 8 times 1/3 times pi. Now we put the real numbers first, and we put the irrational numbers second, because that's how we write it when we have those two types of numbers. Now let's go ahead and multiply the 8 and the 1/3. So we have 8 over 3 times pi. Now we can't forget our units. In this case, the units are centimeters squared because we're dealing with area. And the last thing that we're going to do with this example is we're going to convert that number into a decimal, because sometimes it asks you for that. In order to do that, we multiply 8 over 3 times pi, or 3.14, and the result of that is 8 and 38 hundredths, and that number has been rounded to the nearest hundredth. We have our units, centimeters squared, so we have two different ways to represent the area of a shaded sector with a central angle of 60 degrees and a radius of 4 centimeters. Now let's take a look at example 2. Now example 2 is very similar to example 1. So we're going to go ahead and begin the same way by writing down the area of a sector in a circle formula. And that formula is pi times radius squared times theta divided by 360 degrees. Now let's take a look at the circle. They gave us two measurements. The first measurement they gave us is 74 degrees, and that represents the central angle, or theta. The next one they gave us is 6 inches, and that represents the radius, or r. So we're going to go ahead and substitute those two measurements into the formula or equation, and now we have sector AB is equal to pi times 6 squared times 74 degrees divided by 360 degrees. Now we're going to follow the order of operations. So we're going to go ahead and square that number, and 6 squared is 36 because 6 times 6 is 36. And now we have sector AB is equal to pi times 36 times 74 degrees divided by 360 degrees. So we're going to simplify the degrees by dividing by 2 degrees to each number, and 74 degrees divided by 2 degrees is 37, and 360 degrees divided by 2 degrees is 180. So let's write down what we have so far. So we have sector AB is equal to pi times the 36 times 37 over 180. Now we can go ahead and just multiply those two numbers together, or we can continue simplifying, and we're going to simplify the 36 and the 180 by dividing each number by 36. Now if you don't realize 36 is the biggest factor, you can always divide by a smaller number and keep going. So we're going to do the biggest factor, 36. So 36 divided by 36 is 1. And 180 divided by 36 is 5. So let's write down what we have so far. We have sector AB is equal to 1 times 37 divided by 5 times pi. Now we put pi at the end because we put irrational numbers last and real numbers first. So that's why, once again, pi is last. So now let's go ahead and multiply the 1 and the 37 divided by 5. And that gives us sector AB is equal to 37 divided by 5 pi. Now we can't forget our units. Our units are inches squared since we're talking about area. And now we're going to go ahead and multiply those two numbers so we can get a decimal number. And 37 divided by 5 times pi, where pi is 3.14. And the result of that is 23 and 25 hundredths. And that number has been rounded to the nearest hundredth, and we have our units inches squared. So we have two different ways of representing that shaded sector with a central angle of 74 degrees and a radius of 6 inches. Now let's move on to example 3. Let's read the example. Find the area of the unshaded sector. So this case is a little bit different, but it's really the same process. You just have to be careful on the wording. And we're going to go ahead and begin with the same way by writing down the area of the sector in a circle formula. And that formula is pi times radius squared times theta divided by 360 degrees. So they give us two measurements. 120 degrees, that represents a central angle. And they gave us 5 centimeters, which represents the radius. In this case, we don't want 120 degrees because that is the shaded sector. What we want is the unshaded sector. So we're going to do total minus shaded is equal to unshaded. And the total is 360 degrees. And we're going to subtract 120 degrees. And that gives us 240 degrees, which represents another central angle. And that central angle is the one we want. So now we can substitute 240 degrees and 5 centimeters into the formula or equation. And now we have sector ACB is equal to pi times 5 squared times 240 degrees divided by 360 degrees. Now let's go ahead and follow order of operations. So we're going to square that number 5, and 5 squared is 25. Because 5 times 5 is 25. And now we have sector ACB is equal to pi times 25 times 240 degrees divided by 360 degrees. So now we're going to go ahead and simplify the degrees, and we're going to divide each degree by 120 degrees. So 240 degrees divided by 120 degrees is 2. And 360 degrees divided by 120 degrees is 3. And now let's write down what we have so far. We have sector ACB is equal to pi times 25 times 2/3. We can't simplify 25 and 3 because they don't share any factors beside 1. So let's just go ahead and rewrite it so that pi is the last number because pi is irrational. Any irrational numbers go second or last in this case, and real numbers go first. So we need to multiply the 25 and the 2/3, and that is 50 divided by 3 times pi. And now we can go ahead and add our units. which in this case are centimeters squared. And now let's put that number as a decimal. So we're going to go ahead and multiply 50 divided by 3 times pi. Since pi is 3.14, we're going to multiply 50 divided by 3 and 3.14, and the result of that is 52 and 36 hundredths. And once again, that number has been rounded to the nearest hundredth. We have our units centimeters squared. So we have two different ways to represent the area of the unshaded sector with a central angle of 240 degrees and a radius of 5 centimeters. Now let's take a look at example 4. Let's read the example. Find the area of the unshaded sector. We're still finding the area of a sector, so we can go ahead and write down the area of a sector in a circle formula. And that formula, once again, is pi times radius squared times theta divided by 360 degrees. Now let's take a look at the circle. They gave us two measurements. The first one is 260 degrees, and that is a central angle. But that is not the theta or central angle we want. We want the unshaded sector central angle. They gave us the shaded sector, and the other measurement they gave us is the 10 meters, and that represents the radius. So we now need to begin a process of figuring out how to find the unshaded sector angle or the central angle of that sector. And in order to do that, we need to do total minus the shaded is equal to unshaded. We know the total is 360 degrees. We know the shaded is 260 degrees. And we can subtract those two numbers, and the result of that is 100 degrees. We now have the two measurements that we need. We have the central angle of the unshaded sector, and we have the radius. So we can go ahead and substitute those two numbers into the formula or equation. And now we have sector AB is equal to pi times 10 squared times 100 degrees divided by 360 degrees. We're going to follow the order of operations. We're going to go ahead and square that number 10, and 10 squared is 100 because 10 times 10 is 100. And now we have sector AB is equal to pi times 100 times 100 degrees divided by 360 degrees. Now we're going to go ahead and simplify those degrees, and we're going to divide each degree by the biggest factor they share, and that factor is 20 degrees. Now, if you don't realize that, you can always pick a smaller one and do another step or two until you pick the biggest factor. So now we're going to do 100 degrees divided by 20 degrees, and that is 5. And we're going to do 360 degrees, divide that by 20 degrees, and that is 18. Now let's write down what we have so far. We have sector AB is equal to pi times 100 times 5 over 18. We could multiply the two numbers together already, but we can simplify 118 and divide each number by 2. So 100 divided by 2 is 50, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. Now let's write down what we have so far. We have sector AB is equal to 50 times 5 over 9 times pi. Now once again, we put the irrational number last because that is where it goes, and we put the real numbers first. And now we're going to multiply 50 and 5 over 9, and the result of that is 250 divided by 9. So now we have sector AB is equal to 250 divided by 9 times pi, and we need to add our units. And then in this case, we have meters squared since we're talking about area, and our last step is to convert that number into a decimal. In order to do that, we need to multiply 250 divided by 9 times pi, where pi is 3.14, and the result of that is 87 and 27 hundredths, where that number has been rounded to the nearest hundredth, and we have our units meters squared. So we have two different ways to represent the area of an unshaded sector with a central angle of 100 degrees and a radius of 10 meters. Now it is your turn, so go ahead and pause this video so you can take your time to answer this question. I will show you the answer in 3, 2, and 1. If you got it correct, well done. If not, there's always tomorrow.